The scent of peonies and vanilla cake filled the sun-drenched garden, a perfect backdrop for the perfect life. Audrey Shaw, radiant in a powder-blue maternity dress, laughed as her friends showered her with gifts. Her husband Matthew, a man who oozed success like cologne, stood by her side, his hand resting possessively on the swell of her belly. It was the picture of domestic bliss, the final beautiful chapter before their baby arrived. But a single unopened gift box sat apart from the rest, wrapped in stark white paper, with a simple black bow. This was Audrey's gift to their unborn child, a gift she promised would define its future. No one knew that by the end of the day, that simple box would detonate a life, shatter a marriage, and expose a truth more shocking than anyone could ever imagine. Audrey Clark had met Matthew Shaw 7 years ago at a charity gala for the city's Architectural Preservation Society. She was a junior architect, then full of sharp lines and sharper ideas, determined to make her mark on the city skyline. He was already a name in property development, a man who saw skylines not as art, but as assets. Matthew didn't just enter a room, he conquered it. He had a way of looking at you, a focused intensity that made you feel like you were the only person in a universe of 1,000 souls. He'd pursued her relentlessly. He sent orchids to her small office, not roses saying, "Roses are for fleeting romance, orchids are for lasting beauty." He respected her ambition, or so she thought. He'd listen for hours as she spoke about structural integrity and sustainable design, his eyes gleaming with what she mistook for shared passion. He was her biggest cheerleader, convincing her to leave her firm and start her own boutique agency, Clark Designs. He even provided the seed capital, a generous loan she was determined to pay back with interest. Their wedding was an event talked about for months, a tasteful affair at a vineyard estate. Her friends were enamored. Her sister Brenda, a pragmatic ER nurse, was more reserved. "He just seems polished," Brenda had said, swirling her champagne. "Like a table you're afraid to set a drink on." Audrey had laughed it off. That polish was what she loved. Their life was a meticulously curated masterpiece. Their home in the affluent suburb of Westport was a testament to her design skills, and his wealth a sprawling modern colonial with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a manicured lawn that rolled down to a private brook. Their friends were power couples. Their weekends were spent at country clubs and gallery openings. It was stable. It was secure. It was Audrey had convinced herself happy. The decision to have a baby felt like the final perfect piece of the puzzle. Matthew was ecstatic. He immediately began planning the nursery, insisting on the most expensive Italian furniture and organic everything. He'd come home from work, kiss her deeply, then kneel to press his ear against her belly, murmuring promises to their unborn child. But over the past year, subtle dissonances had begun to creep into their perfect harmony. It started with late nights at the office, which he explained away as closing a monster deal. Then came the business trips, sudden and frequent. He became more guarded with his phone, angling the screen away from her, a nervous tick he'd never had before. When she'd ask who he was texting, he'd flash a brilliant smile and say, "Just my mother. You know how she fusses." His mother, Corinne Shaw, was a woman carved from ice and old money. She saw Audrey not as a daughter-in-law, but as a temporary custodian of the Shaw family name. Corinne's approval was transactional. It was given in exchange for Audrey maintaining the flawless image required of a Shaw wife. The real crack in the facade appeared 3 months before the baby shower. Audrey had been feeling unwell and had left her office early. As she pulled into their long cobblestone driveway, she saw Matthew's sleek black sedan parked near the garage. A wave of relief washed over her. He was home early, too. But as she walked through the front door, she heard voices from his home office. A woman's voice, light and musical, punctuated by a throaty laugh. Then Matthew's voice, low and intimate, in a tone he hadn't used with Audrey in years. Her heart turned to a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She didn't move. She just stood in the marble foyer, her hand on her 8-month belly, and listened. She couldn't make out the words, but the melody was unmistakable. It was the sound of betrayal. She backed away silently, her breath catching in her throat. She got back in her car and drove to a park overlooking the city, the skyline she'd once dreamed of shaping, now looking like a row of jagged teeth. She could have screamed. She could have cried. She could have gone back and confronted them, thrown the woman out, and shattered their carefully constructed life right then and there. But as she sat there, one hand protectively over her child, a different feeling began to surface, pushing through the pain. It was a cold, clear, architectural rage. Rage that builds, not destroys. She wasn't a fragile vase to be shattered. She was an architect. She understood foundations, stress points, and controlled demolition. Matthew had made a critical error. He had mistaken her grace for weakness. He thought he was building an empire, but he had laid its foundation on a fault line. And she, the architect of their life, knew exactly where to place the charges. For the next 3 months, Audrey played the part of the blissful, expectant mother to perfection. She smiled, she nested. She planned the baby shower down to the last detail. She listened to Matthew's lies about work, nodding with a serene smile as he spun tales of late-night board meetings and demanding clients. All the while, she was building a new structure in secret. She hired a private investigator, a discreet man named Mr. Walsh, who came highly recommended. She met with a forensic accountant, a sharp-witted woman named Diana. And she spent hours with her lawyer, a woman who specialized in divorces that were less like separations and more like corporate dissolutions. The baby shower was her design. It would be held in their beautiful garden, the scene of their supposed happiness. It would be catered by the best, attended by everyone who mattered in their social circle, including Matthew's mother. It would be a celebration of new life, and it would be the stage for a spectacular public demolition. The mysterious white gift box, now sitting on the gift table, was not a baby blanket or a silver rattle. It was a detonator. The afternoon sun cast a golden glow across the garden. White tents billowed softly in the breeze, and the clinking of champagne flutes mixed with polite, moneyed laughter. Everything was perfect, almost painfully so. Audrey moved through the crowd of about 50 guests, a vision of maternal serenity. She accepted compliments on her glow, her dress, the impeccable taste of the decor. She smiled at her mother-in-law, Corinne, who was holding court near the fountain, recounting Matthew's latest business triumphs to a captive audience. Her sister Brenda stayed close, a protective sentinel, in a simple linen dress. "You okay?" she whispered, handing Audrey a glass of sparkling water. "You seem a little tense." "Just tired," Audrey lied, placing a hand on her belly. "The baby's been kicking up a storm." Brenda narrowed her eyes. She knew Audrey better than anyone. She knew her sister's tells the slight tightening around her mouth, the almost imperceptible straightening of her spine. This wasn't fatigue. It was resolve. "All right," Brenda said, letting it go for now. "Just know I'm here." If you need me to accidentally spill a tray of crab puffs on anyone, just give me the signal. Audrey gave her a genuine, grateful smile. I'll keep that in mind. Matthew was in his element, playing the proud husband and father-to-be. He moved from group to group, accepting back slaps and congratulations, his arm always finding its way back to Audrey's waist, staking his claim. He seemed larger than life, invincible in his tailored suit, unaware of the chasm that had opened beneath his feet. After an hour of mingling and gift-opening a mountain of designer baby clothes, impossibly tiny shoes and high-tech gadgets, Matthew tapped a glass for attention. The chatter subsided. If I could have everyone's attention for a moment, he began beaming. He raised his glass to Audrey. To my incredible wife. Audrey, you are my rock, my inspiration. You've designed our beautiful home, and now you're designing our beautiful family. Seeing you carry our child is the greatest joy of my life, and I can't wait to start this next chapter with you. The crowd cooed with a collective "Oh!" Audrey's smile was a perfect crystalline mask. She met his gaze, her heart beating a slow, steady rhythm, like a drum before a battle. "Thank you, darling," she said, her voice clear and sweet. Matthew's smile widened. He was basking in the adoration. But the day is full of surprises. He continued, a mischievous glint in his eye. I actually have a special guest I'd like to introduce. Someone who has become very important to me and the future of my company recently. A real rising star. A murmur of curiosity went through the guests. Audrey felt Brenda stiffen beside her. She knew. In that instant, she knew exactly what he was about to do. The sheer, unmitigated arrogance of it was breathtaking. He wasn't just having an affair. He was trying to normalize it, to weave it into the fabric of their lives right here, right now. He gestured towards the stone path leading from the side of the house. A young woman stepped forward from the shadows of a large oak tree where she had been waiting. She was in her late 20s, beautiful in a sharp, hungry way, wearing a crimson dress that was entirely inappropriate for a baby shower. It was a dress designed to be noticed a splash of blood against the pastel canvas of the day. This was Kendra Foster. The woman from the phone call. The woman from the private investigator's photos. Photos of clandestine lunches, late-night departures from a downtown apartment, a weekend trip to Napa, disguised as a business conference. Everyone, Matthew announced, his voice booming with pride. I'd like you to meet Kendra Foster, my Senior Vice President of Acquisitions, and a vital part of our future. A stunned, awkward silence descended upon the garden. The air grew thick and heavy. Guests exchanged confused, uncomfortable glances. This was not a business meeting. This was a baby shower. To bring a junior colleague, a strikingly beautiful one at that, and introduce her with such effusive praise was a spectacular breach of etiquette. It was a power play, a message being sent. Kendra stepped forward, a practiced, demure smile on her face that didn't quite reach her predatory eyes. She looked directly at Audrey. Audrey, it's such an honor to finally meet you, she said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. Matthew talks about you all the time. I'm so happy to be here to celebrate with you. She was holding a gift, a small, elegantly wrapped box from Tiffany & Co. It was a gauntlet thrown down in front of everyone. Corinne Shaw's face was a mask of confusion, her perfectly powdered brow furrowed. She looked from Kendra to her son, a flicker of displeasure in her eyes. This was not part of the carefully curated script of their lives. Brenda looked like she was about to physically erupt. Her knuckles were white where she gripped her glass. Audrey say the word she hissed under her breath, but Audrey was preternaturally calm. The storm inside her had passed, leaving behind a terrifyingly clear, quiet eye. She looked at Kendra, then at her husband, this man she had once loved, who now stood before their friends and family, attempting to publicly humiliate her. He was testing her, expecting tears, a scene, a retreat into feminine hysterics. He was trying to establish a new world order in which he was the sun, and she and this other woman were merely planets forced into his orbit. Audrey let the silence stretch for a few more seconds, savoring the discomfort that rippled through the crowd. Then she smiled. It was a slow, deliberate smile that did not touch her eyes. "Kendra," she said, her voice as smooth as polished marble. "Thank you for coming. Matthew is right. It is a day full of surprises." She turned her gaze to her husband, her smile never wavering. "In fact, Matthew, your timing is perfect. We've opened all the other gifts. All that's left is mine, the one I bought for the baby." She gestured toward the gift table to the stark white box with the single black bow. "Brenda, darling." Would you mind Brenda looking utterly bewildered, but trusting her sister implicitly retrieved the box and handed it to Audrey. It was heavier than it looked. Matthew chuckled, relieved. He thought he had navigated the awkward moment. He thought she had accepted it. Another gift. "You spoil me, Audrey." "Oh no," Audrey said, looking him directly in the eye, her voice dropping just enough to carry a new chilling weight. "This gift isn't for you. It's for our child. It's a gift of truth. And I think it's only right that everyone here, including your special guest, gets to share in it." She placed the box on the table in front of her. The final act was about to begin. The air in the garden was now so thick with tension you could taste it. The polite chatter had evaporated, replaced by a collective anxious stillness. Every eye was fixed on Audrey, on the white box, and on the terrifying calm that had settled over her. Matthew's jovial mask was beginning to slip. A flicker of unease crossed his face. This was not the reaction he had anticipated. He had expected tears, a whispered argument in the kitchen, perhaps a dramatic but ultimately private confrontation later. He had expected to be in control. Kendra Foster stood awkwardly to the side, her smug confidence wavering. She had clearly been coached by Matthew, told that Audrey was understanding, or perhaps too timid to make a scene. She looked to Matthew for a cue, but he was too focused on his wife, a dawning horror in his eyes. "A gift of truth," Matthew repeated slowly, forcing a laugh that sounded like grinding gears. "Audrey, my love, you're being so dramatic. What is this?" Audrey ignored him, her attention directed at the assembled guests. "Thank you all for coming today," she began, her voice resonating with a strength no one had ever heard from her before. "Thank you for the beautiful gifts and for your well wishes for my child." The subtle correction hung in the air, a verbal shot across the bow. "Matthew is right," she continued, her gaze sweeping over the crowd before landing on him like a physical blow. "He's a man who loves surprises. He's built his entire career, our entire life on them. So I thought it was time I gave him a few of my own." She placed her hand on the white box. "This box contains 3 gifts for my baby. 3 foundational truths upon which their life will be built. The first is the gift of a safe and stable home." Her eyes locked onto Matthew's. "Matthew, do you remember when we bought this house my father had just passed away, and I used a significant portion of my inheritance for the down payment. In fact, it was the enter down payment. You called it our investment." Matthew's face paled. "Audrey, what are you doing? This is not the time or the place." "Oh, I think it's the perfect time and place," she retorted, her voice cutting through his. "You also may remember that you had your lawyer, Mr. Adler, draft a prenuptial agreement. You told me it was a formality, a way to protect your business assets. You were in such a hurry to get it signed before our wedding trip to Tuscany. You probably don't remember Clause 11, Section B, do you?" She didn't wait for an answer. It states that any real property purchased with premarital assets or inherited funds remains the sole property of the individual who provided those funds. I used my inheritance. You used a loan from your business, which you paid back from our joint account, an account primarily funded by my design firm's profits for the first 2 years. She paused, letting the words sink in. "I had my lawyer review it last month. This house, this beautiful garden, the roof over our heads, it's all mine." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Corinne Shaw looked as if she'd been slapped. Kendra's jaw was slack with disbelief. Audrey's voice dropped, becoming deadly serious. "So the first gift to my child is this house? Unencumbered, stable, and entirely free of you. I've had a notice of eviction drawn up. It's in my purse. I expect you and your personal belongings to be gone by tomorrow evening. You can have your things sent to your office." Or perhaps she added, flicking a glance at Kendra, "to your downtown apartment on Bishop Street. Apartment 14B, isn't it?" The specific detail, the street, the apartment number was a masterstroke. It confirmed this wasn't a guess. It was a fact, researched and verified. Kendra looked like she was about to faint. Matthew was sputtering, his face turning a blotchy red. "This is insane. You can't be serious." "You're my wife. Your wife is a title you've clearly shown." "You have no respect for," Audrey said calmly. "And I'm just getting started." She gestured back to the box. "The first gift is security. The second gift is justice." Brenda, who had been watching with a mixture of shock and awe, now looked at her sister with pure, unadulterated pride. The woman who had been weeping in a park 3 months ago was gone. In her place stood a queen, calmly dismantling a corrupt kingdom in front of its entire court. The guests were no longer just watching a marital spat. They were witnessing an execution. The garden was utterly silent, save for the rustling of leaves and the frantic, shallow breathing of Matthew Shaw. His carefully constructed world was beginning to fracture the hairline cracks of his arrogance, spreading into gaping fissures. He looked around at the faces of his friends and colleagues, searching for an ally, but found only a sea of stunned, horrified expressions. "Justice," he scoffed, his voice a hoarse whisper. "What are you talking about?" "You've gone mad, Audrey. The pregnancy, it's made you irrational." Audrey let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor. "Irrational, Matthew. You of all people should know I am never irrational. I'm an architect. I deal in facts, figures, and blueprints. For the past 3 months, I haven't just been designing a nursery. I've been studying a different set of blueprints, the ones for your business." She slowly, deliberately untied the black ribbon on the white box and lifted the lid. She reached inside and pulled out not 1 but 2 items. The first was a thick, professionally bound document, its cover emblazoned with the logo of a prestigious accounting firm. The second was a sleek silver USB drive. She held them up for all to see. "For the past 5 years, you've been telling me how Shaw Development is your legacy, the empire you built from the ground up," she said, her voice ringing with clarity. "But empires need funding, And when your personal expenses started to outpace your profits, expenses like, for instance, a leased apartment on Bishop Street, a new Porsche for your vice president, and several undeclared weekend trips to the Cayman Islands, you found a creative source of funding. She placed the bound document on the table with a heavy thud. This is a forensic audit of Shaw Development's accounts, conducted by Diana Finch, the best in the business. It details with excruciating precision how you've been embezzling funds through a network of shell corporations. You've been overbilling on materials for your construction projects, pocketing the difference, and hiding the profits in offshore accounts. You haven't been building an empire, Matthew. You've been running a Ponzi scheme with concrete and steel. Corinne Shaw let out a small, strangled cry. Matthew, is this true? He shot his mother a venomous look, his composure completely shattered. It's a lie. She's making it all up. She's a vindictive hormonal woman, trying to ruin me. Audrey's voice was like ice. Then let me introduce you to Mr. Peterson. She scanned the crowd. Robert, could you please step forward? A distinguished, silver-haired man in his late 60s detached himself from a group of guests near the back. Robert Peterson was a quiet, old-money investor, the silent partner who had provided the majority of the capital for Matthew's last 3 major developments. He was known for his integrity and his utter intolerance for financial misconduct. He walked to the front, his face grim, and stood beside Audrey. He did not look at Matthew. Mr. Peterson was your partner, Matthew Audrey explained. He trusted you with his family's money. He believed in your vision. He did not, however, sign up to fund your affair or your illegal tax shelters. She patted the audit report. I sent a copy of this to Mr. Peterson a week ago. He was, as you can imagine, deeply disappointed. Peterson finally spoke, his voice low, but carrying immense authority. Matthew, we convened an emergency board meeting this morning via conference call. Based on the evidence provided by Mrs. Shaw, evidence of gross financial misconduct and fiduciary breach, the board has voted unanimously. You are removed as CEO of Shaw Development, effective immediately. Your shares have been frozen pending a full federal investigation. You are no longer welcome on any of our properties. The blow was absolute. It wasn't just his wife leaving him. It was his entire professional identity, the very source of his power and ego being stripped from him in a matter of seconds. He stumbled back a step, his face ashen. Kendra Foster, who had been frozen in horror, finally understood the magnitude of the catastrophe. Her connection to Matthew wasn't just a lover. It was her ticket to a lifestyle she craved. She saw her promotion, her company car, her entire future dissolving into smoke. Her face, which had been a mask of smug superiority, was now twisted in pure panic. But that's not all, Audrey said, picking up the silver USB drive. The second gift to my child is justice. But justice must be served. This little drive contains copies of everything. The audit bank statements from your offshore accounts, email correspondence, where you explicitly detail the scheme to your accountant. A copy has already been delivered to the district attorney's office. Another is with the IRS. They are very interested in your creative accounting, Matthew. She looked him up and down, a predator assessing her fallen prey. You didn't just cheat on me, your wife. You cheated your partners, your employees, and the government. You built our life on a foundation of lies, and like any poorly constructed building, it was destined to collapse. I just chose the time and place for the demolition. She had taken his house. She had taken his company. she had likely taken his freedom. The crowd was a tableau of shock and awe. This was no longer a baby shower. It was a public reckoning. But Audrey wasn't finished. There was one gift left in the box, the most personal and the most devastating of them all. Matthew Shaw looked like a man who had been hollowed out. The swagger, the charm, the veneer of invincibility, it had all been stripped away, leaving behind a pathetic, trembling shell of a man. His empire had crumbled in less than 10 minutes, brought down by the quiet, methodical woman he had so grievously underestimated. He stared at Audrey, his eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. Why, he whispered, his voice cracking. Why would you do this? We had everything. You had everything. Audrey corrected him, her voice devoid of pity. You had a wife who loved you, a child on the way, a successful business, and you were willing to risk it all for… what? For her. She flicked a dismissive glance at Kendra, who now seemed to be trying to melt into the manicured hedges. For the thrill of deceit, for your own bottomless ego. She turned her attention back to the white box, her movements calm and deliberate. There is one final gift for my child, the most important one of all. The first gift was a home. The second was justice. The third is a name. A new wave of confusion rippled through the onlookers. A name, a child's name, is their first identity, their legacy. Audrey continued, her voice softening slightly as she placed a hand on her belly. It connects them to their heritage, to their family. For months, you and I have argued about it. You were insistent on Matthew Shaw Jr. You wanted him to carry on the Shaw legacy. She looked directly at her mother-in-law, Corinne, whose face was a stony mask of horror. You wanted a grandson to bear the family name, didn't you, Corinne? To carry the torch of Shaw development, the pride of the Shaw lineage. Corinne was speechless, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Well, Audrey said, her voice turning sharp as steel again. That legacy is now one of fraud, disgrace, and imminent criminal charges. The Shaw name is no longer an asset, it's a liability. It's poison, and I will not have my child tainted by it. She reached into the box for the final time and pulled out a single folded document. It was thick, official-looking paper. This is the third gift. It's a legal declaration. I have already filed it with the courts. She unfolded the paper and held it up. My son will not be named Matthew Shaw Jr. He will not carry your name at all. His name will be Rowan. Rowan Clark. The name landed with the force of a physical blow. Clark. Her maiden name. She was erasing him not just from her life, but from the very identity of his child. It was the ultimate act of severance, a final, irrevocable statement that his part in this story was over. Furthermore, Audrey announced, her voice ringing with finality. This document is a petition for sole legal and physical custody of my unborn child, effective upon his birth. It cites moral turpitude, emotional endangerment, and felony financial crimes as grounds. It also includes a restraining order, preventing you from coming within 500 feet of me or the hospital where I will be giving birth. As if on cue, a man in a plain black suit, who had been posing as a member of the catering staff, stepped forward. He walked directly up to the stunned Matthew and held out an identical set of papers. Matthew Shaw, the man said in a flat, unemotional voice. You've been served. The gasp from the crowd was sharp and unified. The public humiliation was now complete, legally notarized and delivered. Matthew stared at the papers in the process server's hand as if they were a venomous snake. Audrey finally allowed a single genuine emotion to cross her face, a look of profound, weary relief. She had done it. She had secured her future and her child's future. She looked at her husband one last time, the man who was now a stranger to her. You see, Matthew, the real gift today isn't in this box. The real gift is freedom. Freedom for my son from your corruption and your lies. And freedom for me. She turned to Kendra Foster, who was trying to slip away unnoticed. And for you, Miss Foster, Audrey said, her voice dripping with disdain. I hope your ambition was worth it. You hitched your wagon to a falling star. The senior vice president position you were so proud of ceased to exist about 5 minutes ago. I suggest you update your resume. With that, she turned her back on them both. The performance was over. The demolition was complete. All that was left was to survey the wreckage. The moment the process server uttered the words, "You've been served," the delicate membrane of social decorum in the sun-drenched garden was irrevocably pierced. For a long, suspended moment, there was only the sound of the wind rustling through the oak trees and the collective held breath of 50 guests. Matthew Shaw stood frozen, the legal papers held out to him like a venomous offering. His face, which had cycled through shock and rage, went utterly blank. It was the terrifying stillness of a pressure vessel reaching its breaking point. Then something inside him snapped. It began not as a shout, but as a low, guttural groan that clawed its way up from his chest. The sound escalated into a primal roar of pure, unadulterated fury, a sound of an animal trapped and wounded. No. He screamed the word, tearing from his throat, raw and ragged, his eyes wild and bloodshot, fixed on Audrey. But his rage was too vast, too explosive to be directed at a single target. It needed to obliterate something tangible. He lunged not at his wife, but at the beautifully arranged gift table beside her. With a guttural bellow, he swept his arm across its surface in a wide, violent arc. The magnificent 3-tiered cake, a confection of vanilla bean and peonies, was the first casualty. It cartwheeled through the air, exploding against the flagstone patio in a sickening spray of cream and crumbs. Crystal champagne flutes, delicate porcelain plates, and the mountain of lovingly chosen baby gifts went next crashing to the ground in a cacophony of shattering glass and splintering wood that echoed through the stunned silence. Guests shrieked and scrambled backward, shielding their faces as shards of crystal skittered across the stones. "You won't get away with this!" he bellowed, his chest heaving his tailored suit, now a mockery of his lost composure. He pointed a trembling, cake-smeared finger at Audrey. "You think you can ruin me, you venomous, scheming bitch. That company is mine. That baby is mine." He took a stumbling step forward, his intentions terrifyingly clear. But before he could get any closer, 2 figures moved to intercept him, forming a human wall between him and Audrey. The first was Robert Peterson. The silver-haired investor moved with a surprising, deliberate speed, placing his body squarely in Matthew's path. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He simply stood there, an immovable object of old money authority and profound disappointment. "That's enough, Matthew," he said, his voice low and firm, cutting through the hysteria. "You are making a pathetic situation infinitely worse. Have some shame." The second and more formidable barrier was Brenda. The coiled spring of her protective fury finally unleashed. She moved so she was shoulder to shoulder with Peterson, planting her feet and crossing her arms. Her ER nurse persona took over, calm in a crisis, but with an unmistakable aura of command and zero tolerance for nonsense. She looked Matthew up and down, not as a brother-in-law, but as a dangerously unstable patient. "You take one more step towards her," Brenda snarled, her voice dropping to a low, lethal register, "and I will personally make sure you'll be leaving in an ambulance. And trust me, I know exactly where to apply pressure to make it hurt the most. You've done enough. Get out!" Matthew blocked and cornered, his rage, thwarted, desperately sought a new target. His wild eyes scanned the crowd of horrified faces and landed on Kendra Foster, who was trying to use the chaos to melt into the manicured hedges at the edge of the lawn. "You!" He spat the accusation flying from him like poison. He rounded on her, his fury instantly rechanneled. "This is your fault. All of it. You and your endless, greedy demands. I need a better car, Matthew. This apartment isn't big enough, Matthew. When are you going to promote me, Matthew?" "You pushed me for all of it." Kendra, who had been pale with terror, flushed with the indignation of the betrayed. All pretense of the demure protégé vanished. She shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly. "Are you kidding me? You're the one who told me she was a fragile doormat. You're the one who said you were bored to tears with your perfect little life. You swore to me you were going to leave her right after the baby was born. You promised me everything, you lying bastard." Their sordid, desperate argument laid bare the rotten core of their affair for everyone to hear. It was no grand passion. It was a cheap transaction of ego and ambition, and now both parties were bankrupt. It was at this moment that Corinne Shaw finally moved. Her initial shock had calcified into a glacial fury, an iceberg of rage directed not at her son's infidelity or his blatant crimes, but at the catastrophic breach of their family's one sacred rule: never ever show weakness in public. The Shaw name had been immolated on a pyre of cheap champagne and a grocery store drama. The humiliation was absolute. She marched through the debris, her heels clicking purposefully on the stone, and stopped directly in front of her son. She didn't shout. Her voice was quiet, but it was laced with a venom more chilling than any scream. "Matthew, stop this. Now." She looked at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. "You are a disappointment. You have disgraced this family in a way I never thought possible." She then turned that withering gaze upon Kendra. "And you. Get off this property. You are nothing. You were a momentary, vulgar distraction. Disappear." Kendra flinched as if physically struck. Without another word, stripped of her dignity and her future, she turned and fled, her crimson dress a smear of color as she scrambled away down the long driveway. Having dispatched the help, Corinne turned to the final architect of her social ruin, Audrey. Her eyes burned with a cold fire. "You," she hissed. "You did this. You stood here and aired our family's private matters for the amusement of these people. This could have been handled with dignity, with discretion." Audrey, who had remained silent and still throughout the entire chaotic eruption, finally met her mother-in-law's gaze. She was no longer trembling. A profound calm had settled over her. "Dignity," she replied, her voice steady and clear, ringing through the quieted garden. "There was no dignity in what your son did to me. There was no discretion in him bringing his mistress to my baby shower. He built this stage, Corinne. He sent out the invitations. He intended to humiliate me in my own home, in front of my friends. I just wrote the final act." She took a small step forward, her presence suddenly immense. You speak of handling things privately. That's the code, isn't it? The code that allows men like your son to cheat and lie and steal, while women like me are expected to swallow our pain and maintain the facade for the sake of appearances. I'm not interested in that kind of dignity. I chose to handle this with absolute clarity. The standoff was absolute. The old guard, with its secrets and silent contracts against the new world Audrey was building, founded on radical, painful truth. Defeated Corinne grabbed her son's arm in a vice-like grip. "We are leaving." She began to drag the broken, defeated Matthew away, past the staring, judgmental eyes of their former friends. He stumbled along, a hollowed-out man. His expensive suit stained his face a mask of pathetic self-pity. As they reached the edge of the patio, he looked back at Audrey one last time, a maelstrom of hate and disbelief in his eyes. Then he was gone. For a moment, the garden was silent once more. Then, tentatively, one of the older women began to clap. It was a slow, deliberate sound that was quickly joined by another, and then another, until a wave of applause and heartfelt cheers broke out. It was a spontaneous, unified uprising of support. Women who had smiled politely at Matthew an hour earlier were now looking at Audrey with unadulterated awe. Her friends rushed to her side, enveloping her in a protective embrace. Robert Peterson approached, his face etched with sincere admiration. He gently took Audrey's hand. "Audrey," he said, his voice full of emotion, "that was the bravest, most principled thing I have ever witnessed. You are a remarkable woman. If there is anything you or your son ever need, anything at all, you have my word and my resources at your disposal." It was only then, shielded by her friends and validated by the support of the crowd, that the adrenaline that had held Audrey together for 3 months finally drained away. A violent tremor started in her hands. Her knees felt weak. The mask of calm control crumbled, and the sheer crushing weight of it all descended. Hot tears, not of sadness, but of profound, wrenching relief, welled in her eyes and streamed down her face. Brenda wrapped a strong, steadying arm around her sister's shoulders, pulling her close. "It's over, Aud," she whispered, her own voice thick with emotion. "It's finally really over. You're free." Audrey leaned into her sister's embrace, her body shaking with silent sobs. She looked around the beautiful garden, at the wreckage of her old life scattered across the stones. It was a mess, but it was a mess of her own, making a controlled demolition, and for the first time in 7 years, as she stood there safe and surrounded by love, with her hand on the precious life growing inside her, she felt the solid, unshakable bedrock beneath her feet. The site was cleared. Now the reconstruction could begin. The silence in the days following the baby shower was more profound than any noise. After the last of the sympathetic friends had departed, and the caterers had cleared away the physical debris, Audrey was left with the echoing quiet of a house that had been a home and was now a battleground. The air itself felt different, lighter, as if the structure had exhaled a toxic presence it had been holding in for years. But with that relief came an undertow of exhaustion so deep it felt cellular. For 3 months, she had been running on a volatile fuel of adrenaline and righteous fury. Now that the detonation was complete, her body, heavy with the child she had fought to protect, demanded a reckoning. Matthew, predictably, did not go quietly into the night. The first salvo in his counterattack arrived via a curt, aggressive email from a high-priced law firm threatening countersuits for defamation, emotional distress, and a litany of other baseless accusations. The letters were designed to intimidate, to bully her back into the role of the pliant wife. A year ago, they would have terrified her. Now she simply forwarded them to her lawyer with a calm, one-line instruction. Handle this. His legal challenges were a desperate flurry of activity, the death throes of a defeated empire. Motions were filed to contest the prenup, claiming he had signed it under duress. His lawyers attempted to paint Audrey as an unstable, vindictive woman, using her pregnancy as a weapon. They fought the custody petition, arguing that a father, regardless of his personal failings, had an inalienable right to his child. But it was all just noise. Audrey's case, like a well-designed building, had been constructed with impeccable integrity. The prenup was ironclad. The evidence of his financial crimes, now in the hands of federal investigators, was irrefutable, and dozens of sworn affidavits from the party guests painted a damning portrait of his public behavior, effectively torpedoing any claim he had to being a stable parental figure. Each victory came not with a bang, but with the quiet ping of an email. Reading the subject line, Reshaw Visu Clark. Motion to dismiss. Granted. Audrey felt not a surge of triumph, but a slow, steady wave of relief. It was the feeling of a heavy load being lifted one stone at a time. The legal battle was simply the final phase of the demolition, clearing away the last of the hazardous materials before the real work could begin. Professionally, Audrey's world bloomed with an astonishing vibrancy. The story of the demolition party, though never reported in salacious detail, circulated through the circles that mattered. She became a quiet legend. Clark Designs was inundated with offers, many from prominent female executives and entrepreneurs who saw in Audrey a reflection of their own struggles and strength. One new client, a tech CEO commissioning a new corporate campus, put it plainly during their first meeting. "I read your portfolio, and your work is brilliant," she said, her gaze direct and full of respect. "But I hired you because I heard you don't just build beautiful structures. You build them on solid ground with no hidden flaws. I need that kind of integrity." Her partnership with Robert Peterson solidified into a genuine friendship. He appointed her to the board of the new company, Phoenix Legacy Properties, which rose from the ashes of Shore Development. In the sterile, glass-walled boardroom, her voice, once relegated to discussing paint swatches and kitchen layouts, at home now carried weight on matters of finance, ethics, and corporate strategy. Robert valued her perspective not just as a designer, but as a moral compass. "You see the stress points before anyone else, Audrey," he told her after one meeting. "You understand that a foundation isn't just about concrete, it's about trust. You've reminded me of that." Her home, her sanctuary, was slowly reborn. She and Brenda spent a weekend purging every last trace of Matthew. It was a strange, cathartic ritual. As they packed his expensive suits and ridiculously large watches into boxes for donation, they found an old wedding photo tucked away in a drawer. In it, a younger Audrey stared up at Matthew, her face radiant with a love and trust that now seemed painfully naive. Brenda watched her sister's face carefully. Audrey didn't cry. She simply traced the image of her younger self with a fingertip. "I remember her," she said softly. She wanted so badly to believe in the blueprint he showed her. She paused, then placed the photo face down in the box. She did the best she could. "But I'm the architect now." The most joyful act of reclamation was the nursery. They painted the walls a warm, calming shade of sage green. Brenda assembled the crib, complaining theatrically about the confusing instructions, while Audrey sat on a rocking chair, folding tiny onesies. They didn't talk about Matthew or the past. They talked about the future, They debated the merits of different lullabies, laughed about the absurdities of baby-proofing, and dreamed about the little person who would soon fill the house with a new kind of life. With each brushstroke, with each folded blanket, Audrey was consciously creating a space of peace, a room where no shadows from the past would ever be allowed to fall. 2 months after the party, on a crisp autumn morning, when the air smelled of wood smoke and wet leaves, the first contraction tightened across her belly. It was real. It was time. At the hospital, Brenda was her rock, a fierce and steady presence. She held Audrey's hand, breathed with her through the rising and falling waves of pain, and shielded her from the clinical indifference of the world outside. Labor was a primal, all-consuming crucible. In the throes of it, there was no room for the past, for Matthew, for revenge or justice. There was only the present moment, the immense, overwhelming work of bringing a new life into the world. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, a structural challenge of flesh and bone. And then, after hours that felt like a lifetime, it was over. A raw, piercing cry cut through the exhaustion, and the world shifted on its axis. They placed him in her arms. He was warm, impossibly small, and utterly perfect. He had a dusting of dark hair, and when he opened his eyes, they were her own, calm, deep, and observant. A wave of love so powerful it felt like a physical force washed over her, cleansing every last corner of her heart that had been bruised or broken. This was the point of it all. This was the purpose. "Hello, Rowan Clark," she whispered, her voice choked with tears of pure joy. "Welcome to the world." He curled his tiny hand around her finger, his grip surprisingly strong. In that moment, holding her son, Audrey knew the gifts she had announced at the shower were only the beginning. He had a safe home, a legacy of truth, a strong name. But she now understood the final, most profound gift. She would spend the rest of her life giving him a blueprint for a life built with integrity. She would teach him that strength was not about dominance, but about resilience. That success was not measured in assets, but in honesty. That a name was not something to be inherited, but something to be earned through character. She would teach him that you can't always choose the ground you're given, but you always have the power to tear down what's rotten and build something beautiful, true, and strong in its place. Looking out the hospital window at the distant city skyline, a landscape of steel and glass ambition, she no longer saw a collection of buildings. She saw a testament to the enduring human need to create, to build things that last. She, Audrey Clark, architect and mother, had found her masterpiece. Her greatest project was just beginning. That's the incredible story of Audrey Clark, a woman who refused to be a victim in her own life. When faced with the ultimate betrayal, she didn't just crumble. She drew up a new blueprint. She teaches us that strength isn't always about shouting and fighting. Sometimes it's about quiet, meticulous planning and the courage to detonate a life built on lies to make way for a future built on truth. Audrey didn't just seek revenge. She sought justice and secured a safe, honest future for her child. Her story is a powerful reminder that the most beautiful structures are often built on the foundations of what was once broken. If Audrey's story of resilience and empowerment moved you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell for more real-life stories of justice, strength, and incredible twists you won't want to miss. Thank you for listening.